The crowd was amazing tonight once again. I got to play now my last 4 matches on.
What if the man who wasn't even supposed to play became the champion of Shanghai? That's not a headline from a sports tabloid. It's the surreal reality of Valentin Vacherot, a 25-year-old tennis player from Monaco who arrived in Shanghai not as a favorite, not even as a contender, but as a 22nd alternate. In plain English, that means he wasn't meant to be there at all. When he boarded his flight to China, he didn't have a confirmed spot in the tournament. He had a suitcase full of training gear, a borrowed belief, and a silent promise to himself. If there's even a 1% chance, I'll take it. And then, the call came. Someone withdrew, then another. Suddenly he was in. Barely 24 hours before the first serve. No preparation, no fanfare, just a chance. The kind that only destiny itself could design. In the first qualifying round, he was already on the brink of going home. Down 4-3 facing breakpoint, the dream was slipping through his fingers. But something snapped inside him. Not in panic, but in clarity. The kind of clarity that only desperation can gift. He steadied his breath, found his rhythm, and began to swing as if every ball carried the weight of his future. He won that match, and the next, and another after that. By the time he entered the main draw, few noticed him. The cameras followed the stars. The journalists wrote about the favorites. But deep in the background, a man no one expected was quietly surviving, round after round, as if guided by something unseen. He faced players with stronger resumes, bigger names, louder entourages, yet he kept winning. Often after losing the first set, often against impossible odds. His resilience was almost eerie, like he was rewriting the script in real time. And by the time the semifinals arrived, the whispers began. Who is this guy? But for Valentin, that question had always been the soundtrack of his life. From a tiny country with barely a handful of professional players, he grew up hearing it. Too small, too unknown, too ordinary. And yet, on that humid Shanghai night, every drop of sweat, every hour spent hitting against the same practice wall back home, it all suddenly made sense. He had crossed the oceans, both real and emotional, to arrive here. And now, standing one step away from the final, he wasn't just playing for himself anymore. He was playing for belief itself. For every athlete who's ever been told, you don't belong. Because sometimes, the ones who aren't supposed to be there are exactly the ones who are meant to stay. Imagine walking onto one of the biggest tennis courts in the world, not to face an enemy, but your own family. That was the cruel poetry of the Shanghai Masters final. Valentin Vacherot versus Arthur Fils, cousins by blood, rivals by destiny. From the moment they met at the net, you could feel the tension vibrating through the stadium air. The handshake was polite, almost warm, but beneath the surface lived 1,000 silent memories. Childhood rallies on cracked clay, family barbecues where tennis balls never stopped flying, laughter that turned into competition long before they knew what pressure really meant. Now, there they were. Two men who once shared the same dream, standing on opposite sides of the net, fighting to make it real. The first set belonged to Arthur. His serve was brutal, his confidence unshakable. Valentin tried to stay calm, but every point felt heavier than the last. How do you fight someone who knows your rhythm, your habits, your emotions, almost like a mirror? He lost that set. But instead of collapsing, he smiled. It was the smile of someone who had already been counted out 100 times and survived every single one. And then came the shift. The crowd started feeling it before anyone else did. The pace changed. The air changed. Valentin began serving like a storm, 200 kilometers per hour, no hesitation, no mercy. His body language transformed. Every movement said, I'm not the underdog anymore. The second set went his way, and by the time the third began, it was no longer just a tennis match. It was theater. 17 winners. 2 unforced errors. 16 of 18 points won on serve. Those aren't just statistics. They're the language of destiny being written in the real time. Arthur's legs began to fail him, cramps, fatigue, the human cost of glory. When he collapsed to the ground in the final game, it wasn't defeat. It was the body giving out after giving everything. Valentin rushed to his side. No celebrations, no shouts. Just a cousin kneeling next to another, whispering something the microphones couldn't catch. The crowd rose in silence, torn between heartbreak and awe. There are victories that break you before they lift you. And this was one of them. Valentin didn't scream when he won. He just closed his eyes. Because deep down, he knew. This wasn't about one man winning. It was about a family that dared to dream too big, and a sport that was generous enough to let both of them be remembered. That night, as the lights of Shanghai shimmered on the silver trophy, two cousins had written a story that even Hollywood might have found too poetic to believe. As the crowd erupted, Valentin didn't rush to the microphone or kiss the trophy. He reached for something else, a small red and white flag folded neatly in his bag, the flag of Monaco. It looked almost fragile in his hands, a sliver of cloth representing one of the tiniest nations on Earth, but in that moment, it felt like the weight of a continent. Because Monaco isn't supposed to produce tennis champions. It's a playground for the wealthy, a postcard city of yachts and Formula One, not the birthplace of endurance or grit. Yet here he was, a man from a country smaller than some sports arenas, standing as the Shanghai Masters 1000 champion. He lifted the flag high. For a moment, the stadium lights bounced off the red stripe like fire. Cameras flashed. The crowd cheered, not just for the victory, but for the symbolism. Later, in the press room, his voice cracked when he spoke about home. "We don't have many players," he said. "Our federation is small, maybe the smallest in the world. But tonight, we showed that even from a small place, you can dream big." It wasn't just a victory for him. It was a statement that greatness doesn't belong only to the giants, that even a country of a few square kilometers could raise a warrior capable of conquering the world. He thought of his childhood at the Monte Carlo Country Club, the same courts where he used to watch stars like Novak Djokovic train. He was the kid collecting balls, dreaming one day he might share that same stage. And now, he had not only shared it, he'd owned it. Behind every shot he played, there was something more than muscle memory. It was the spirit of every young athlete from a small place who's ever been told, "That's too big for you." His victory became something of a national festival back home. Videos from Monaco showed watch parties erupting in cheers, flags waving from balconies overlooking the Mediterranean. It wasn't just a tennis title. It was identity, validation, pride. And perhaps that's what made it so emotional when he said softly, almost to himself, "I hope we made them proud." He didn't know that back home. He already had. That night, in the silence of his hotel room, the silver trophy gleamed beside the flag. It was a quiet reminder. Sometimes the world's smallest places create its biggest hearts. There are victories that belong to the present, and then there are moments that touch eternity. For Valentin Vacherot, that moment came when he looked up into the stands and saw him, Roger Federer, the man who defined elegance, grace, and the very idea of perfection in tennis, sitting quietly, watching every rally, every serve, every heartbeat of the match. Valentin admitted later that he couldn't help himself. "After every big point, I looked up, just a glance, to see if Roger reacted. Sometimes Federer smiled, sometimes he nodded. And in those brief, wordless exchanges, something invisible passed between them. Not fame, not approval, but recognition. The recognition of effort, of spirit, of a fighter who had earned his place. Not through privilege or legacy, but through sheer will. Having him there, up there, Valentin said, was even bigger than the trophy. And it's easy to understand why. For a player who once entered tournaments as a nobody to perform in front of the man whose posters once hung above his childhood bed, it was like life coming full circle. But what made it truly beautiful was how unplanned it all was. He didn't chase the spotlight. He didn't expect history. He simply played. And life rewarded him with a scene that even the most poetic scriptwriter couldn't have written. Roger Federer watching a boy from Monaco rise into the light. The cameras caught it too. Federer's applause after the match. The small, approving smile when Valentin lifted the trophy. It wasn't just a spectator's reaction. It was the unspoken passing of a torch. From one era to another, from the man who once inspired dreams to the one now living one. Later that evening, when Valentin finally sat alone, away from the noise and lights, he replayed the week in his mind. The uncertainty, the flights, the qualifying rounds, the cramps, the flag, the family, the legend's gaze. How do you even process that? You don't. You simply feel it. And that's the quiet magic of sport. It takes ordinary people and turns their lives into myth. Before he left Shanghai, Valentin said something that stuck with everyone in the press room. "This week I met Novak, I met Roger, and I met myself." Maybe that's what this story was all about. Not just a title, but a man finding who he truly is when the world finally looked his way. So as the lights of Shanghai faded behind him, one question remained. Not just for Valentin, but for all of us watching. What would you do if life gave you one unexpected chance? The kind you were never supposed to have. Would you take it? Or watch it pass? Because sometimes, the greatest victories are born from the moments that were never meant to happen. If this story moved you, if it made you believe again in impossible dreams, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more. Because somewhere out there, another unknown is about to become unforgettable.